The morning sun blazed mercilessly over the construction site, turning the air thick with dust and the acrid smell of hot tar. Workers moved like shadows against the skeletal frame of the rising building, their hammering creating a harsh symphony that echoed through the downtown district. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. A pristine white Bentley rolled to a stop at the site's edge, its polished surface gleaming like a pearl against the grimy backdrop. The door opened, and out stepped Mary Chen, a name that made stock markets tremble and competitors lose sleep. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the rough concrete as she stood, her silk dress worth more than most workers' annual salaries, rippling in the dusty breeze. Every hammer fell silent. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Phone cameras appeared like flowers, turning toward the sun. Mary's eyes, hidden behind designer sunglasses, scanned the frozen tableau of workers until they found him. Smith. Just Smith. No last name anymore, not since he'd stopped being somebody. He stood there in his worn hard hat and faded orange vest, concrete dust painting his dark skin gray, his calloused hands gripping a wheelbarrow full of bricks. "My God, is that Mary Chen? The Mary Chen?" someone whispered. But Mary heard nothing. She saw only him, the man who had once stood where she now stood, at the pinnacle of success, the man who had unknowingly shaped her entire life with a single gentle rejection, the man she had spent 5 years destroying. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that held storms of emotion, guilt, love, hatred, regret, all swirling together like toxic chemistry. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the first step toward him, her heels catching in the gravel. The site supervisor rushed forward, stuttering apologies and asking how he could help, but Mary raised one manicured hand, silencing him without looking away from Smith. Smith's eyes met hers across the dusty expanse. Recognition flickered, followed by something else. Resignation? Peace? He set down the wheelbarrow handles slowly, deliberately, and straightened his aching back. Around them, workers pulled out phones, whispered, speculated. The billionaire and the laborer frozen in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Smith?" Mary's voice carried across the site, cultured and commanding, yet somehow broken. "We need to talk." The story between them had begun 7 years ago in a world so different from this construction site that it might have been another planet entirely. Smith Morrison had once been the golden boy of the business world, a name spoken with reverence in boardrooms and featured on magazine covers. At 35, he was the youngest CEO in the Fortune 500, a self-made man who had built Apex Industries from a single food truck to a hospitality conglomerate that spanned continents. The boardroom of Apex Industries had gleamed with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city skyline, and Smith had stood at its head like a king surveying his kingdom. But he'd been different from other CEOs. That's what everyone said. Despite his custom Armani suits and million-dollar smile, Smith Morrison never forgot where he came from. He personally reviewed employee files, signed off on promotions for the lowest-level workers, and knew the names of the janitor's children. His mother, Patricia, still insisted on cooking Sunday dinners in his penthouse despite his protests that she should be relaxing. His father, William, a retired teacher who still wore his decades-old watch, would sit in Smith's office sometimes, reading books while his son worked, occasionally looking up to remind him that character mattered more than profit margins. "You're changing the world, son," William would say, clasping Smith's shoulder after reading about another acquisition, another expansion, another success. "Never, Dad," Smith would promise, meaning every word. The night his world began to unravel, Smith had been celebrating the Beijing deal, Apex Industries' expansion to Asia. Champagne flowed, board members toasted, and his phone buzzed with congratulations from senators, celebrities, even a text from the president's chief of staff. In the midst of all this glory, a young analyst named Mary Chen watched from the corner of the room, her eyes never leaving Smith's face. Mary Chen had been with Apex Industries for 2 years, hired straight from Harvard with recommendations that glowed like neon. She was brilliant. Everyone agreed on that. Her proposals for Asian market expansion were revolutionary, and Smith had taken notice. But for Mary, professional recognition had never been enough. She had fallen in love with Smith Morrison the moment he'd praised her first presentation, called her the future of this company in front of the entire board. For 2 years, she had studied him obsessively. Not just his business strategies, but his personal habits, his preferences, his rhythms. She knew he took his coffee black with 1 sugar at 7 a.m., switched to green tea after 2 p.m. She knew he loosened his tie after 3 p.m., that he had a habit of tapping his pen against his chin when deep in thought, that he called his mother every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. She arrived first every morning, left last every night, anticipated his needs before he voiced them, solved problems before they reached his desk. Other employees whispered that she was his favorite, his protégé, maybe more. But for Smith, she was just Mary, brilliant, dedicated Mary who would run a company of her own someday. He wrote her recommendation letters for executive programs, introduced her to industry leaders, never realizing that every professional gesture felt personal to her, that every mentoring moment was interpreted as something more. The night everything changed, Mary had waited until the office was empty, the celebration long over, the champagne bottles standing like soldiers in the dim light. She'd practiced her confession 100 times, brought his favorite coffee from the shop across town that stayed open late just for executives like them. "Mr. Morrison," she had said, her voice trembling slightly. "Smith, I need to tell you something." He looked up from his papers, that warm smile that made her heart race spreading across his face. "Of course, Mary. You know my door is always open for you." The words cumbled out. Her feelings, her dreams of them together, her belief that they were meant to be. She talked about how they could build an empire together, how she understood him like no one else did, and how she had been waiting for the right moment to tell him. Smith's expression had shifted from surprise to understanding, to something that looked like pity, and that pity had been worse than any rejection could have been. He said that voice gently, coming around the desk, but maintaining careful distance. "Mary, you're going to be something extraordinary. You already are, but not here, not with me. You deserve someone who sees you as an equal, not as their employee. And you deserve a career that's yours, not shadowed by office gossip about sleeping your way to the top. You're too talented for that." "But I love you," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. He knew, and somehow that made it worse. He respected her too much to take advantage of those feelings. The power dynamic here, it wouldn't be right. "You'll understand someday. You'll thank me." He thought he was protecting her. She heard only rejection. Where he saw mentorship, she had seen romance. Where he offered professional respect, she wanted personal love. The rejection, delivered with such careful kindness, transformed in her heart to something else entirely. Humiliation, rage, and a thirst for revenge that would consume the next 5 years of her life. Mary resigned the next day, citing a family emergency. Smith, thinking he was helping, wrote glowing recommendations, even called contacts at other firms to help place her. Each gesture of support felt like another twist of the knife to Mary. She thought he wanted her gone. He wanted to ensure she never came back. He was probably laughing at her with his executive friends,
the silly little analyst who thought she could reach that high. At her new firm, which she quickly came to own through a series of hostile takeovers funded by information she'd gathered at Apex Industries, she built two things simultaneously: a business empire and an elaborate plan for revenge. She studied Smith's every business move from afar, learned his patterns, his weaknesses, the people he trusted most. She discovered that his best friends, James Thornton and David Chang, weren't as loyal as they seemed. James had expensive tastes his salary couldn't support. Cocaine was expensive, and his habit was growing.
David had gambling debts that grew like cancer, owing money to people who broke bones when payments were late. Mary approached them separately, strategically. She offered James money, lots of it, for inside information at first, then for something more. She found David at his lowest, desperate and afraid of what his creditors might do to his family, and offered him a way out. Together, over months of careful planning, they crafted the perfect betrayal. Forged documents, backdated contracts, a trail of embezzled funds leading to accounts bearing Smith's name. Accounts he'd never opened, filled with money he'd never touched. $15 million, supposedly siphoned from employee pension funds. The night before the FBI raid, James and David had sat in Smith's living room, sharing aged whiskey and old stories, their laughter echoing through the penthouse. To brotherhood, James had toasted, his smile never wavering, even as the forged documents lay filed with the SEC. To trust, David had added, knowing the FBI would raid Smith's offices in less than 12 hours. To friends who are more than family, Smith had replied, never suspecting that his brothers in all but blood had already driven the knife deep into his back. When the FBI kicked down his door at dawn, Smith was brewing coffee, preparing for a charity board meeting where he was planning to announce a new scholarship program for underprivileged students. They threw him against his marble countertop, handcuffs biting into his wrists as they read him his rights. The mugshot made every major newspaper's front page. The Golden Boys fall from grace, they called it. From penthouse to penitentiary, the tabloids screamed. The trial was a media circus. James and David sat in witness boxes, their testimony rehearsed to perfection, their eyes never meeting Smith's. They spoke of suspicious behavior, secret meetings, pressure to falsify documents. Every word was a lie, wrapped in just enough truth to be believed. Mary watched from the gallery, her face a mask of professional interest, just another spectator to the destruction of a titan. "I didn't do this," Smith had shouted in court, his lawyer's hand on his shoulder, the only thing keeping him seated. "James, David, tell them the truth." But they never wavered, never cracked. They had been paid well for their performance. The jury found him not guilty on criminal charges. The evidence was ultimately too circumstantial. But the damage was irreversible. Civil lawsuits drained his accounts faster than water through a broken dam. The board voted him out unanimously, some with regret, others with barely concealed satisfaction. Banks called in loans. The IRS froze his assets pending investigation. His reputation, built over decades, crumbled in weeks. His family, unable to bear the shame, became collateral damage. His father's heart, already weak, couldn't take the stress of seeing his son's name dragged through mud. William Morrison died, thinking his son might actually be a criminal. His last words, a whispered, "I still believe in you," that haunted Smith every night. His mother aged 10 years in 6 months, her eyes permanently red from crying. Her sister's promising law career was tainted by association. Law firms wouldn't touch a Morrison, not after what Smith had allegedly done. "You should change your name," Patricia had told her daughter through tears. "Start fresh somewhere else." "But he is still my brother," Jasmine had replied, but she'd moved to Seattle anyway, where fewer people knew the Morrison name. Within 6 months, Smith Morrison became just Smith, another homeless man in a shelter, staring at a bowl of soup that tasted like liquid despair. His MBA from Wharton meant nothing. His honorary doctorates were worthless paper. He had tried to get jobs, any job, but his face had been too famous, his fall too public. Even McDonald's had turned him away. Too much controversy, the manager had said apologetically. The construction job was a lifeline thrown by accident. The supervisor, Big Mike, they called him, didn't watch the news, didn't read papers. He needed bodies to carry bricks, and Smith had a body. That was enough. "You ever done construction?" Big Mike had asked, noting Smith's soft hands, his educated speech patterns that he tried desperately to roughen. "I'm a fast learner," Smith had replied, the same words he'd once used when pitching his first business idea to investors. "Fine, 15 an hour, cash. You don't show up, you don't get paid. You slack off, you're gone. Clear?" Clear. The first day nearly broke him physically. Muscles he'd never used screamed in protest. The sun that once touched him through climate-controlled office windows now burned his skin raw. His soft hands bled through work gloves, leaving red stains on every brick he touched. Other workers laughed at his fumbling with basic tools, calling him college boy, without knowing how right they were. "Hey, college boy, those bricks ain't gonna move themselves." "Sorry," Smith would mutter, lifting another load that felt like it would tear his arms off. He slept in a room he rented week by week above a Chinese restaurant, the smell of old grease seeping through the walls. No lease, no credit check, cash only. Dinners were instant noodles or dollar menu items, eaten alone while reading discarded newspapers about his former competitors' successes. Every article about Apex Industries' dissolution, about Mary Chen's acquisition of his company's assets, was another twist of the knife. But something unexpected happened in that brutal simplicity. Smith found a peculiar peace. No board meetings full of hidden agendas. No partnerships built on disguised betrayals. No friends who would sell you out for the right price. Just honest work. Lift, carry, place. Repeat. His hands hardened into leather. His back strengthened into iron. His mind, once racing with million-dollar strategies, learned to find rhythm in repetition, meditation in monotony. He made new friends, real friends, though they didn't know his history. Miguel, an immigrant from Guatemala, sending every spare penny home to his sick daughter. Miguel shared his lunch when Smith forgot his, never asking why a man who spoke like a professor was carrying bricks. "You're not like the others, hermano," he had said once. "You work like you're punishing yourself for something." "Maybe I am," Smith had replied, and Miguel had just nodded, understanding that some stories were too heavy to share. There was Tommy, an ex-convict with arms like tree trunks and a heart bigger than his criminal record. He'd done 5 years for assault, defending his sister from her abusive boyfriend, though the court hadn't seen it that way. Tommy taught Smith how to lift with his legs, not his back, how to read blueprints, how to whistle at pretty women walking by, though Smith never did. "You're all right, Smith," Tommy would say. "You don't judge. I like that." And Andre, a veteran who'd left half his soul in Afghanistan. He couldn't hold down office work, too many people, too many sudden noises. But he could build a wall straighter than a laser line, find peace in the predictability of construction. "This work," Andre had said once during a break, "it's honest. You build something, it stands or it falls. No lies, no politics, just physics." Just physics, Smith had agreed, understanding perfectly. They shared cigarettes during breaks. Smith had never smoked before, but it was part of the brotherhood. Traded stories that were mostly lies, watched each other's backs when tools went missing or supervisors came looking for someone to blame. They didn't know who he had been, and Smith never told them. Here he was just another man trying to survive, and somehow that was enough.
Maybe that was all he had really been, and the rest had been the illusion. Meanwhile, Mary Chen had everything she'd thought she'd wanted. Her empire had tripled since Smith's fall, built on the skeleton of his innovations, his contacts, his strategies that she'd memorized during all those late nights.
She lived in a mansion with 20 rooms she never used, flew in a private jet to meetings where everyone feared her, attended charity galas where people smiled to her face and whispered behind her back about how she'd gotten her start. The business magazines that once featured Smith now profiled her as the phoenix of finance, rising from the ashes of Apex Industries' collapse. But she couldn't sleep. Every night she saw his face in that courtroom. The moment comprehension dawned, not just of the betrayal, but of its orchestration. The way his shoulders had slumped, as if Atlas had finally shrugged. She'd started watching the construction site where he worked, first through hired investigators, then in person. She'd sit in her Bentley with tinted windows, watching him through binoculars like some corporate stalker. She watched him share his lunch with stray cats, half a sandwich given without thought to creatures everyone else ignored. She watched him help older workers with heavy loads, taking on their burden without being asked. She watched him give half his paycheck to help Miguel's daughter get medicine, never mentioning it, never expecting thanks. The man she'd destroyed had somehow become stronger in his ruin than he'd ever been in his success. And worse, or better, she couldn't tell anymore, she was falling in love with this version of him, the version without pretense, without power, without anything but his character. Unable to resist, Mary hired Smith for a special project, renovating her estate. She told herself it was the final twist of the knife, the ultimate humiliation. She offered double the usual rate, knowing he couldn't refuse, not with his mother's hospital bills piling up. "I want him," she'd told Big Mike, pointing directly at Smith. "Only him." "Ma'am, he's one of our newer guys. I've got men with 20 years. "Him," she'd repeated, sliding a check across the desk that made Big Mike's eyes widen. 6 months minimum. The renovation was carefully orchestrated torture. She had him cleaning her pool house while she held board meetings on the terrace discussing Apex's former assets, making sure to speak loudly about the companies she'd bought, the executives she'd fired, the legacy she'd dismantled. She made him serve drinks at parties where his former colleagues were guests, watched the color drain from their faces when they recognized him, saw them awkwardly pretend not to know him. "Smith," she'd call out during one particularly cruel afternoon, "could you clean the windows? We're having trouble seeing clearly." The double meaning was never subtle. She had him plant roses in the rain while she watched from her warm office, had him paint fences that didn't need painting, organize garages that were already perfect. Every task was designed to break him, to force him to acknowledge what she had done, to beg for mercy or explode in rage. But Smith never broke. He worked with quiet dignity, thanking her for the steady employment, mentioning how it helped him afford medicine for Miguel's daughter. He said yes, Miss Chen, to every degrading request, completed every humiliating task with precision. When former colleagues avoided eye contact, he simply moved past them like a ghost, invisible and untroubled. His calm acceptance drove her insane. Where was his anger? His pride? She wanted him to rage, to acknowledge what she had done, to give her the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Instead, she was the one breaking. The first crack in her armor came on a rainy Thursday. She watched from her window as Smith worked in her garden, soaked to the skin, because she'd deliberately scheduled outdoor work despite the forecast. He was planting the roses she'd demanded, thorns tearing through his worn gloves, blood mixing with rain on his hands. Then she saw him pull out his lunch, a single peanut butter sandwich in a reused plastic bag. He sat under a small overhang, barely sheltered,
and gave half the sandwich to the stray cat that haunted her gardens. The cat, mangy and suspicious of everyone, crept closer to Smith than it had ever come to her or her staff. "Why?" I found myself asking aloud. "Why don't you hate me?" The second crack came when she overheard him on the phone during a break. His mother was in the hospital, heart problems, he was telling someone. He was asking about payment plans, promising to send what he could, apologizing for not being able to do more. His voice broke when he said, "Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm doing better. Don't tell her where I'm working." Mary had destroyed his ability to help his own mother, and he was still protecting his mother from the shame of knowing he worked for her. The final crack shattered everything during a merger celebration she'd thrown. The ultimate degradation, making Smith serve champagne to celebrate her acquisition of the last piece of Apex. But during the party, a drunk board member cornered one of Mary's young assistants, pressing her against a wall despite her obvious discomfort and whispered protests. Smith stepped in without hesitation. "Sir, I think you've had enough. Let me call you a car." "You don't tell me what to do, servant. You're nothing. Less than nothing. I could buy and sell you 1,000 times over." "Maybe," Smith agreed quietly, gently but firmly creating space between the man and the terrified assistant. "Do you know who I am?" "Someone who's had too much to drink and needs to go home," Smith replied calmly. The man raised his hand as if to strike Smith, but Smith caught his wrist. Not violently, just firmly. "Sir, you don't want to do that. There are cameras everywhere. Your wife wouldn't appreciate seeing this on social media tomorrow." Security arrived, led the man away. The assistant, crying with relief, thanked Smith profusely. Smith just patted her shoulder paternally and went back to serving drinks, as if nothing had happened. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. She walked to her window and saw Smith's silhouette in the pool house. He was reading by candlelight, probably to save electricity. She recognized the book, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, the same book he used to quote in board meetings about maintaining dignity in adversity. The man she'd destroyed had somehow become stronger in his ruin than he'd ever been in his success. And worse, or better, she couldn't tell anymore, she was falling in love with this version of him. The version without pretense, without power, without anything but his character. The truth came out the way most truths do, by accident, through someone who didn't know it was meant to be secret. James Thornton, drunk and bitter because Mary had cut him off after the betrayal, had tracked Smith down at the construction site. His cocaine habit had evolved into something worse, and he needed money desperately. "Come on, Smith," he slurred, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You must have something stashed. Nobody loses everything. Swiss accounts, offshore holdings." "I have nothing for you, James," Smith replied quietly, continuing to work. "Nothing? After everything I did for Mary Chen, this is what I get? Do you know what she paid me to forge those documents? How much your girlfriend spent to destroy you?" Smith went very still. The wheelbarrow handles creaked in his grip. "What did you say?" His voice carried, despite its quietness. James laughed, ugly and bitter. "You didn't know. Your precious protégé, Mary Chen, she orchestrated everything, the fraud, the trial, all of it. Revenge for you turning her down. She played you like a violin and you never even heard the music. I have the emails, the wire transfers. She paid me and David $5 million each to destroy you."
Smith set down his tools with deliberate care. He looked across the site to where Mary stood frozen, having arrived for one of her inspections. Their eyes met across 20 feet that might as well have been 20 miles. "Is it true?" His voice carried despite its quietness. Mary opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. but her face said everything. The guilt, the regret, the twisted love that had driven her to destroy what she couldn't have. Smith nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something he'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. He pulled off his hard hat, set it on the ground, and walked away. No anger, no confrontation, just leaving. "Smith, wait." Her voice cracked like breaking glass. She ran after him, her heels sinking into the construction mud. "Please, let me explain." He stopped but didn't turn. "Explain what? That you destroyed my life because I respected you too much to take advantage of you? That you took everything, my company, my family? My father died thinking I was a criminal, Mary, because I wanted you to succeed on your own merits? You rejected me." The words tore from her throat. "You made me feel small, worthless, like I was nothing to you." Now he did turn, and the sadness in his eyes was devastating. "No, Mary. I tried to protect you. From gossip, from people thinking you hadn't earned your success, from a relationship with an inherent power imbalance. I was wrong to decide for you. I see that now. But I never meant to hurt you." "I love you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I hated you, and then I watched you, and then I loved you, and now I don't know what I feel except that I can't lose you. You already lost me, Mary. You lost me the day you decided revenge was worth more than truth." "I'll give it all back," she called desperately. "Every penny, every company, everything. I'll confess publicly. I'll go to prison if that's what it takes." He paused at the site gate, his hand on the chain-link fence. "Keep it. But know this. You'll spend every day in those boardrooms, in that mansion, in that life built on my bones, remembering that you had love and chose hate instead. That's a prison I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it's one you built yourself, bar by bar, lie by lie." "Smith, please." "My father died thinking I was a thief, Mary. My mother's heart is failing from the stress. My sister had to change her name. You didn't just destroy me, you destroyed everyone I loved. How do you come back from that?" He walked away, and Mary collapsed in the mud, her designer dress ruined, her sobs echoing across the silent construction site. Workers stood frozen, unsure whether to help or flee. Miguel finally approached, offered her his handkerchief, the same man whose daughter's medicine Smith had been paying for. 3 days after the confrontation, Smith returned to work, not to Mary's estate. He'd rather starve to take her money again, but to the regular construction site. His mother's hospital bills weren't going to pay themselves, and pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. The accident shouldn't have happened. Later investigations would reveal a chain of negligence, improper scaffolding inspection, a rushed schedule to meet deadlines, a new worker who didn't know proper safety protocols. The kid was 18, first week on the job, saving money for community college. He'd frozen when the steel beam swung loose from the crane, 500 pounds of metal swinging toward him like God's own pendulum. Smith didn't think. His body moved on instinct, the same instinct that had once made him give his lunch to stray cats and step between drunk executives and frightened assistants. He shoved the kid out of the way, hard enough to send him sprawling to safety. The beam caught Smith across the chest and head with a sound like thunder. "Call 911, someone screamed. "Get that crane secured. Jesus Christ, there's so much blood." Miguel was the first to reach him, cradling his head in his lap, using his own shirt to try to stop the bleeding. "Stay with us, hermano. Help's coming." Smith's eyes were unfocused, blood running from his ears. "The kid? He's fine. You saved him. Now stop talking. Save your strength." "Tell him," he coughed, blood speckling his lips. "It wasn't his fault." The news reached Mary within minutes. One of the workers had recognized Smith from the recent drama and called her, thinking she'd want to know. She drove to the hospital like a woman possessed, running red lights, leaving her Bentley crooked across 2 parking spaces. She burst into the trauma ward, her influence and money cutting through protocol like a blade. "Smith Morrison, where is he? I need to see him now." A doctor tried to stop her. "Ma'am, are you family?" "I'm..." She stopped. What was she?
The woman who destroyed him? The woman who loved him? The woman who orchestrated his complete destruction and then fallen in love with the ruins? I'm all he has. It was true, in the worst possible way. They let her in. Smith lay surrounded by machines, each beep marking another moment of life slipping away. The doctors had been clear. The damage was too extensive. Brain hemorrhaging, crushed ribs, punctured lungs. It was a matter of hours, maybe less. Mary took his hand, surprised by how rough it had become. These hands that once signed million-dollar deals, now calloused from honest labor. His fingers were crooked, from breaks that hadn't healed properly. He'd never had money for proper medical care. His eyes opened, focused with effort on her face. "Mary, I'm here," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry for everything." "He know. I forgave you. The moment I understood." "How?" The word was barely audible through her tears. "How can you forgive what I did?" "Because hate is too heavy to carry. I learned that at the bottom. When you have nothing, you realize forgiveness is the only thing that's truly yours to give." "Don't leave me," she begged. "Please, I'll make it right. I'll tell everyone the truth. Clear your name." "My name?" A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. "Mary, I haven't been Smith Morrison for a long time. Just Smith. And that's okay. Maybe that's who I was always supposed to be." His mother arrived then, aged beyond her years, wearing a coat that had been mended too many times. Mary stepped back, watched mother hold son, listened to whispered words of love and goodbye. His sister came, then Miguel, Tommy, Andre, the family he'd built from nothing, worth more than any board of directors. "Mama," Smith whispered to his mother, "I'm sorry. I couldn't fix things." "You were never broken, baby. You were always my good boy. Always." As the sun set, casting golden light through the hospital windows, Smith's breathing grew shallower. Mary held one hand, his mother the other. "The kid," he said suddenly, urgently. "Tell the kid it wasn't his fault." "We will," Mary promised.
And Mary? His voice was fading. "Build something better. With all of it. Build something that helps people. Like Miguel's daughter. Like that assistant. Like the kid." "I promise," she whispered. "Then it was worth it." Smith Morrison, just Smith, died as the last ray of sunlight painted the room gold, surrounded by people he'd touched not with his wealth or power, but with his simple, unbreakable humanity. The funeral was a study in contrasts that would have made Smith laugh. In the front rows sat construction workers in their best ill-fitting suits, immigrants who'd traveled hours on buses to be there, ex-convicts who'd never entered a church except for their own trials. In the back, trying to be invisible, sat former board members, executives who'd once reported to Smith, society figures who'd celebrated his downfall, then lived to regret it. Mary paid for everything but didn't attend the service. She waited until evening, when the cemetery was empty except for shadows and memories. Smith's grave was simple. He would have wanted it that way. Smith Morrison, he built more than buildings. Mary knelt in her black dress, placing a single white rose on the fresh earth. White for new beginnings. For the purity of the man she'd tried to corrupt but couldn't. For the love that came too late. "You were the man they laughed at," she whispered to the stone. "The day laborer, the fallen CEO, the nobody. But you were greater than us all, greater than your success, greater than your failure, greater than my hate, greater than my love." She pulled out a document, the deed to Chen Enterprises, now legally renamed the Smith Morrison Foundation for Worker Dignity and Protection. Every penny she'd built on his destruction would now build futures for people like Miguel,
Tommy, Andre. People who worked with their hands and their hearts, people the world overlooked. "I kept my promise," she told the grave. "I'm building something better. Miguel's daughter got her surgery. She's walking now. The kid you saved is in college. Full scholarship from the foundation. Your mother has the best care money can buy. And every year, we'll help 1,000 more. Your name will mean something again. Not Smith Morrison, the CEO, but Smith the man who saved a scared kid, who shared his sandwich with a stray cat, who forgave the unforgivable." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for a moment Mary could almost hear his voice. Then it was worth it. She stood, pressed her fingers to her lips, then to his headstone. "I loved you at your highest. I hated you at your lowest. But I learned to honor you only when you had nothing left but yourself. Thank you for that lesson. Thank you for being exactly who you were." As she walked away, her heels clicking on the cemetery path, Mary Chen, once billionaire, once destroyer, now rebuilder, whispered to the evening sky, "You were the construction worker everyone laughed at, but you built something in me that all my money never could. You built a conscience. You built a heart. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest construction project of all." Success can be stolen, reputations destroyed, but character, that's the one thing no one can take. Real wealth isn't what's in your bank account, it's what remains when the account is empty. Did this story touch your heart? What would you have done in Mary's position? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Parent Tales for more powerful stories that will move your soul. Check out our other amazing videos. Each one carries a life-changing message. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Like this video if it touched your heart, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Your comments mean the world to us. Tell us what you think below. Bye!